Welcome, everybody. It is so good to have you here today. I hope you've had a great weekend so far, and I'm glad that you've included Parker Hill in your weekend. Let me give an especially warm welcome to those of you who are guests with us, and if you're here for the first time, we're so glad to have you. And you may have noticed that you're hearing this teaching by way of video, and you may wonder why that is. Well, we're actually one church in 3 different locations: Clark Summit, Wilkes-Barre, and Dixon City, Pennsylvania. And video teaching is one of the ways that we stay connected as a church so that every Sunday we can share together in the same teaching and the same growth. And we're just glad you're a part of it wherever you happen to be today. And let me also encourage you, if you're new, just to take some time before you leave today to introduce yourself to the great volunteers and staff and the pastors at your campus, because they would love to meet you personally. Well, today we're continuing a series called Money Myths. And during this series, we're talking about some of the most common lies that we believe in our culture when it comes to our money and our possessions, and lies that we believe not just in our culture, but oftentimes in the church as well. And what we're talking about in this series, I believe, has the potential to radically change our lives and change our families if we will internalize this and live what we're talking about. Now, let me acknowledge right up front that it's always a little bit uncomfortable talking about money. I mean, especially in church. It's kind of a personal, kind of an emotional subject. And some of you, you're brand new to the church and you're thinking, oh, I get it. Okay, this is why I stopped going to church, because all they ever talk about is money, right? I know what you're thinking. I've been around here for a while. Let me say this, if you're new to Parker Hill. Just relax, because I'm not asking you for anything today. I don't want anything from you. In fact, for all of us here today, what I want today is I want something for us. And what I want for us is to be able to experience the blessing of God in our lives. And the way that we experience God's blessing in our lives is when we live by God's wisdom. And I think one of the areas where our culture has really rejected God's wisdom and God's principles is in the area of our money and our possessions, our finances. And whenever we live life in a way that doesn't coincide with God's wisdom and God's principles, we end up just bringing pain into our lives. I mean, some of you have been through a divorce, and one of the reasons you're not married anymore is because of conflict over money. Some of you, are dealing with stress every single day of your life because of the shape that your finances are in. Some of you would have to admit that there have been times when you've compromised your integrity because of money. And all of those problems, if we could trace them all the way back to their roots, I think we would discover that all of those problems begin with believing a myth and living according to that myth. So during this series, we are unapologetically confronting the myths that we believe in our culture about money. Let me do a little bit of review from last week. We began this series last week talking about soda cups and Depend undergarments, and it was a lot of fun. What we actually talked about was the first myth, which says this: I just need a little more, which I think is the most common and probably the most destructive myth in our culture about money. And we talked about this last week, how there's this drive in our culture just to always get more and more, and we just think that next thing that we get, that next pay raise, that next house, that's going to do it for us. And so we are driven by this myth that says, I just need a little bit more to be happy, to find meaning, to find satisfaction in life. If you weren't here, go ahead and go online later and you can catch up on that. Today we're going to tackle another money myth, and this one's a little bit different. It's this one: it's wrong to be rich. Now, this isn't an idea that most people will verbalize normally, but I think it's something that a lot of people think about in the back of their minds. And I think we're going to be thinking about it this year. This year's a presidential election year. And so what a lot of politicians are going to do is they're going to promise that they're going to watch out for the middle class. They're going to take care of the working person, which is really, really good. But sometimes behind that, there's kind of an undercurrent that says, yeah, and if you're wealthy, then that's not a good thing. In fact, we have a phrase in our culture for somebody who's like, uber rich, somebody who's got tons of money. We say that they are filthy rich. Did you ever hear that? Because sometimes we buy into this myth that, it's wrong to be rich. So we're going to talk about this today. And the response to this may not be what you think. So let's jump in. Take out the connection card that you received when you came in, and on the back of that, there's a place to take some notes. And if you have a Bible, you can open that up or bring up your Bible app on your phone. And let me encourage you, as I often do, that after you leave here today, keep learning. Take advantage of what we call our app notes, which are questions and Bible readings that we put on our website and on our Facebook page 5 days a week, just to reinforce what we're going to talk about today. So every week during this series, we're coming back to one chapter in the Bible, one passage, 1 Timothy chapter 6. That's where we're going to be today. And if you're new to the Bible, let me just tell you some of the background and why this is called 1 Timothy, this part of the Bible. This was a letter written in the first century. The recipient was a young man named Timothy. And Timothy was a pastor in a city called Ephesus. And the church in that city was growing like crazy by hundreds of people. And so Paul, who was Timothy's mentor, key leader in the early church, he writes this letter to Timothy to try to give him some training, long distance, because they didn't have like webinars and video conferencing. And so in this letter, he gives Timothy all kinds of practical instruction about how to lead a church and how to help these new believers follow Christ the way that they ought to. And here in chapter 6, I think, is some of the most amazing wisdom in the Bible when it comes to the subject of our money and possessions. We're going to cover 3 verses. I'm going to read them for you, and then we'll come back and walk through them a little bit more slowly. Here's what it says. Paul says to Timothy, command those who are rich in this present world to cut it out, to stop being rich, right? To get rid of all their money. No, he doesn't say that, because the implication is that even throughout history, even within the church, there are people at different standards of living that God has blessed different people differently. He says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. So let's talk about this myth. It's wrong to be rich. And I want to give you 2 responses to this. Let me give you 2 statements, okay? Now, the first statement that I'm about to give you, you're going to kind of push back on this. You're going to argue with this in your mind. But I want you to hang with me and just hear me out and see if I can convince you of this, okay? You say it's wrong to be rich. Here's what I would say to you. I would say, you already are. You already are. Believe it. Go back to verse 17. Here's how it begins. Command those who are rich in this present world. Now, here's the problem with that sentence. The problem with that is that almost everybody will read that and say, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me. You can skip over this part of the Bible. That's not me, because I'm not rich. I mean, I do okay for myself, but I'm not rich. But I know this guy. Let me tell you about him, because he's really rich. You see, we never really think of ourselves that way, or at least we don't like to admit it. In fact, a few years ago, the Gallup organization did a very interesting poll. They got a bunch of people together and they asked them this question: how much income would you need in order to become rich? And of course, everybody taking the survey gave different answers. And interestingly enough, nobody put themselves in this category, like saying, hey, my income. In fact, when people answered this, and when they went back and surveyed them in terms of their income, they found that pretty much everybody on average would double the amount. Like, okay, if I make $30,000 a year, I would answer and say, well, I think I need $60,000 a year. Or those who made 50, they would say, well, 100,000. And those who made 100,000 said, well, I think it would take 200,000. And see, here's the problem. Rich, it's always out there. It's always a moving target. In fact, in our culture, I think this is our definition of rich, if we're honest with ourselves. We define it this way: having substantially more than I currently have. Like, I'm going to be rich, and I'm almost there, and it's still out there, and it's kind of nebulous. I think it means more than what I have right now. All right, let me give you a much better definition, more accurate definition for the word rich. To be rich is this: having substantially more, not more than I have now, having substantially more than I need. Now, based on that definition, I want to give all of you some very, very good news today. and that's this: you are rich. Now, you may not believe it, and you may not feel like you're rich, but honestly, the reality is that you are rich. And I want to prove it to you, okay? So hang with me here for a couple of minutes. I want to show you a website. When you go home today, I want you to check this website out. Spend about 10 minutes on this website. It's called globalrichlist.com. And what you do is you go on this website and you type in your annual income, then you click on a button, and it tells you how your income compares with the other 6 billion people on this planet. Okay, it's really fascinating. I'll give you an example. Let's suppose you make $32,400 a year, which is actually a little bit higher than the median income in this part of Pennsylvania. So this, for a lot of people here, may be more than what you make. But if you were to make that much, do you realize that you would be in the top 1% of all the people in the world by income? You'd be a 1%er if you make that much money. In other words, if we could reduce the population of the world down to just 100 people, the other 99 would be worse off than you. Isn't that amazing? You are rich. I mean, aren't you glad you came to church today to find this out? And it's kind of a fun website. There's other things you can do with it, but let's get crazy. And let's say you get a job someday where you're making $80,000 a year. And I know that's not most of you guys, but if you were to make that much money, you would be in the top 0.1%, not just 1%, but 0.1% of the richest people in the world. I mean, if that's you, you are filthy rich. You really are. But let's get back a little closer to reality. Let's talk about $40,000 a year. And like I said, this website's kind of fun, so there's other things it'll tell you if you do this. Like it'll tell you how your wages would compare with somebody else in another part of the world. So if you make $40,000 a year, that would be 53 times what the average worker in the country of Indonesia would make. It would take somebody in the country of Indonesia 53 years to make what you make in a year. Or think about soda. If that's your income, it takes you 1 minute and 43 seconds to afford a can of soda. But if you're living in Ghana and you have an average wage there, it takes you 7 hours of a workday to afford that. And think about what your income could buy in other parts of the world. Like if that $40,000 was in the country of Azerbaijan, that would pay 174 doctors. Isn't that amazing? You're rich, and I'm rich, and we didn't even know it. There was a story in the news a few years ago about Bill Gates. He was on a trip to India because he wanted to see firsthand some of the poverty and some of the healthcare challenges there. And while he was in India, he went into the home of an Indian woman, very poor woman, just a hut, and he sat down and talked to her for a little while. And then when Bill Gates got up and left, a reporter interviewed this woman through an interpreter, and the reporter asked this question. He said, "Do you know that you were just speaking to the richest man in the world?" Listen to what this Indian woman said. She said, "All Americans are rich." Like from her perspective, there isn't all that much difference. So the good news here today is this, and you're going to be so excited to know this, that you and Bill Gates are essentially the same when it comes to wealth. That is good news. Now listen, I know you don't think you're rich. I know you don't feel like you're rich. But from a global perspective and from a historical perspective, we are incredibly, incredibly blessed. And here's the thing, most of you are going to push back. And you're going to walk out of here just shaking your head. And you know what? You're going to get in your car and you're going to drive home to your climate-controlled home. And then you're going to get on your cell phone and order a pizza. And somebody's going to deliver that pizza to your house in their car. And it's going to be a cool-looking pizza. And you're going to take a picture of it on your mobile device and then upload it to your Instagram account with your unlimited data plan. But we're not rich. No, we're not rich. Let me tell you about something my daughter Leah says sometimes. Now, I'll show you her picture again just because it's such a cute picture. And I like to see it because she's in South Africa for about 9 months working in a mission school over there. And she has a heart for the poor, I'll tell you. She's been to Haiti and she's been to Costa Rica and we've been to Kenya together. But she has this phrase that I've heard her use so many times, and you've probably heard it too. The phrase is first world problems. And let me give you the context for that. Here's when she'll say that to me. Like I'll say something like, oh, I can't believe the internet connection is so slow here at Dunkin' Donuts. She'll say, yeah, first world problems, Dad. Or, I'll say, oh man, the ice maker is busted on the kitchen door. I'm going to have to drive to the store and buy some ice. Yep, first world problems, she says. Or, I'll be on Amazon and I'm like, oh, I can't believe it. They're sold out of my size in that shoe that I wanted. Yep, first world problems, she'll say. And I kind of eventually adopted that as my own phrase, because sometimes when I'm feeling discontent, I just say that to myself. Yep, first world problems. I mean, I got problems, yeah, but they're like my problems, they're rich people problems. Now, if you really want to think about this more deeply, let me recommend a book to you. It's called More or Less. It's an excellent book that really challenges our thinking on what is enough in our lives. And there's a very interesting part of the book where the author and his wife decide to try an experiment. They wanted to see how many days they could eat with just the food they already had in their house. So they decided they weren't going to go shopping. They were just going to eat whatever was in their pantry, their fridge, their freezer. With one exception, they would get fresh milk every few days. And so they did this. And, they ate, all the frozen hamburger from 10 years ago and all the macaroni and cheese in the boxes and the tuna fish and the canned beets, and the Jell-O and everything. And eventually, that food lasted them for 7 weeks, literally 147 meals they got out of it. And this is what he says in the book. He says, most of the world struggles just to get one good meal a day. Well, I made 147 meals just from the food sitting in my kitchen. How can this be? He says, I hope I'm the only person facing this reality, but I have a feeling that I'm not alone. Because we're rich. We don't feel like it. We don't think we are. And here's why we don't feel like it. Because we always compare ourselves to other people who are a little bit ahead of us. Or what we do is we keep ratcheting up our standard of living, our lifestyle to match our income. So we're always stressed and we don't feel rich. But the truth is we are. And I want to be sensitive because I know that there are people hearing this message that are in some incredible financial stress. And it may not even be your fault. It might be because of a medical situation or a job loss, and it's just a struggle for you. And I'm not insensitive to that. I understand that. And my goal in sharing all this is not to make you feel guilty. My goal in sharing all of this is just to make us feel grateful. That's all. No guilt, just gratitude. Because here's the thing. Every day in this culture, we hear hundreds of advertisements telling us what we don't have. And I think every once in a while, we just need to hear loud and clear what we do have. So if you were to say to me, it's wrong to be rich, my first response would be this: hey, too late. You already are. And that's a good thing. That's a blessing. That's a cool thing. But here's the second way I would respond to this. I would say it's not wrong to be rich, but it is dangerous. See, Scripture never says it's wrong to be wealthy. In fact, some of the greatest heroes in the Bible were very wealthy people like Abraham and David and Solomon and Lydia and Joseph of Arimathea. The Bible never says it's wrong to be rich, but it does give us some serious warnings about what can happen when we are blessed in that way. Let me tell you about 2 dangers of growing wealth. The first danger is this. It's the danger that your pride can escalate. Your pride can escalate. Verse 17, keep reading here. Paul's writing to Timothy, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant. Man, isn't the Bible timeless? Because isn't it true when things are going pretty well in your life and when you've got more than you need, you start to feel a little bit prideful, right? Pride starts to seep into your heart. And you know how it feels, right? You drive that new car and everybody tells you how cool your car is, and that just kind of feels good. Or you buy that new outfit and you can tell everybody's looking at you and you're like, yeah, it's me, got the new outfit going, Or you know what? You go on this awesome vacation, right? And you're sitting there in the resort and you're thinking, I wonder what all the common folks are doing today, When life is going good, when we are blessed, one of the dangers of that is that it can make us proud. Jesus tells a parable about this. It's a really powerful story. We'll come back to it again next week. But it's in Luke chapter 12. And listen to the story that he tells beginning in verse 16. It says, and he told them this parable, the ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool. Now here's the interesting thing. You read that story, and the man in that story is someone that we would describe as a great success. This was a man who had worked hard, who had planned well, who had been productive. He's reaping the rewards of his labor. But God, in the parable, calls him a fool. Why would God call him a fool? Well, the problem isn't his wealth. The problem isn't his success. In fact, the problem isn't anything he did. The problem is what it did to his heart. Let me go back to verse 16 and start over. It says, and he told them this parable, the ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. I love the way Jesus says that. He was a master storyteller. He doesn't say a certain man worked really hard and grew a crop. He says the ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. And not that a farmer wouldn't work hard. We know farmers work hard. But Jesus here is shifting the attention away from what the man had done to what God had done for him, the ground that God created and that God sent the rain onto and brought the sunshine to. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. And then keep reading here, verse 17. Here's the problem. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, see, the problem wasn't the barns. The problem wasn't his success. The problem wasn't his wealth. The problem was that this was a guy who was so focused on himself. All he could say is I and me and mine, like I'm Captain Awesome. And this man was a fool because his success became a mirror in which he only saw himself instead of his success being a window through which he could see the blessings of God in his life. And my friend, in your lifetime, you may enjoy a measure of what this world calls success, but never forget that it's only by the grace of God, because when you begin to forget that, the danger is that your pride will begin to escalate. There's a second danger, though, as well, for all of us rich people. And the second danger for us rich people is this, that our hope can migrate. Listen to this. Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, talked about that, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God. See, when wealth increases, our hope begins to drift. And instead of trusting in God as the source of our ultimate security, we begin to see our wealth as the source of our ultimate security, because I got my credit cards and I got my insurance and I've got my investments and I got my retirement funds. And, you know, it's not a conscious decision. We don't intentionally do this, but slowly over time, our hearts begin to drift and our hope begins to drift until our security is not found in God, but it's found in our stuff. Years ago when I was in college, I came across these verses in Proverbs chapter 30, and I've never forgotten them. This is a prayer, and I've tried to make this the prayer for my life as well. It's just so profound. The writer says, give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. And here's why. He says, otherwise I may have too much and disown you and said, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. But look at that first part. I may have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? And there's the danger. The danger is that when things are going really well and your life is comfortable and it's wrinkle-free and God is blessing you, then suddenly you can say, you know what? Who is God anyway? I'm not sure I really need him. And your hope begins to migrate. I love this verse in Proverbs as well, chapter 18, verse 11. It says, the wealth of the rich, that's you and I, by the way, the wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it, a wall too high to scale, and the key word here is imagine. They imagine their wealth is a fortified city. They imagine that that is the source of their security. They imagine it, but it's not true, because your wealth can never produce an unscalable wall around your life. It can never really protect you or your family or your kids from the things that matter the most, it can never really do anything for your soul. See, the problem is when you become wealthy, you begin to think that that's your security, that that's your hope. In fact, let me ask you a quick question to maybe help you diagnose where your hope really is. Here's the question: which would cause you more anxiety? First, to find out that there is no God, that God doesn't really exist, that your atheist friend was right, there is no heaven, death is all there is. Would that cause you more anxiety? Or secondly, would this cause you more anxiety? To find out that you have no money, that everything's gone, all your savings, all your investments, your cash, it's all gone. Come on, honestly, think about that. Which would cause you more anxiety? To find out there's no God or that you have no money? That's a good way to diagnose your hope. Now, let me ask you to think about that in a little bit different way. Think about the same question, but in a different scenario. Imagine you're in a hospital bed, and a doctor comes alongside your bed, and he has a conversation with you, and he says, "Listen, we tried. We've done everything we can possibly do, but there's nothing more that we can do for you. It's only going to be a matter of days." Let me ask you a question. At that moment, which would cause you more anxiety? To find out that there is no God, or to find out that you have no money? And we all know the answer. At that point, you don't care about your money anymore. The only thing you care about is whether or not there is a God and that you're in a right relationship with Him. Here's the point. All of us know that we would put our hope ultimately in God at the end of life, so why don't we put our hope in God in the middle of life? I'll tell you why. Because in an affluent culture like ours, it's very difficult, because our hope begins to migrate. But you know what's interesting? This doesn't really happen to poor people. Because poor people without a lot of material possessions, they realize that their hope can never be in the things of this world, and so their hope is more easily and more fully placed in God. And I've witnessed this in so many different ways. Like a couple of years ago, my family had the privilege of hosting 3 kids that were part of the Daraja Children's Choir from Africa, and they stayed in our home for several days. And these kids were from the country of Uganda, one of the poorest countries in the world. And in the evenings, we would sit around and talk to them about their life back home. And they'd actually brought pictures of their homes and their villages. And it was fascinating to make the comparison. They lived in homes that were smaller than my garage. No running water, no TV, no refrigerator. Just a simple home, sometimes just 1 or 2 rooms. And it was interesting to try to help them navigate what life was like for me. We're cleaning up after dinner, and I'm helping one of the kids scrape all the food off the plates into the sink, into the garbage disposal, and trying to figure out how to explain that here in America, we have so much food that whatever food we can't eat, we just grind up and wash it down the drain. How do you explain that to somebody like that? Or, one of the little girls was showing me a picture of her house, and in the background, off in the distance was the well, and she said, "That's where we get our water, and I have to walk like 15 minutes and carry a 5-gallon bucket of water back to the house." And I'm telling you, it wasn't 20 minutes later that she asked me for a drink of water. And I said, "Here, let me show you how to get a drink of water out of the door of my refrigerator, like cold, purified water." And I thought about that contrast. But then I also saw another contrast during the time that they spent with us. And I realized that even though those kids had very little compared to what I have in terms of material things, they were incredibly wealthy in one other area, and that was their hope and their faith. I mean, just to hear them pray and to say grace before dinner, and to hear them just kind of break out in song as we were driving in the car, I actually found myself envying them. Because when you don't have much, your hope is in God. There's no other place to put it. But when you're rich, like we are, your hope migrates. See, it's not wrong to be rich, not at all. And my hope and my prayer for all of us is that we experience the blessings of God in the financial area of our lives. But it is dangerous, because when wealth begins to increase, then your pride can begin to escalate and your hope can begin to migrate. And as rich people, we just need to know that. So what do we do about that? How do we be good at being rich people? How do we do that? I think there are 2 things that we need if we're going to prevent our pride from ratcheting up, and if we're going to keep our hope where it should be. I'll tell you the first thing we need is gratitude. We just need gratitude. Paul says to Timothy, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, God who richly provides us with everything. Can I tell you what the number one remedy for pride is? When you acknowledge that everything in your life ultimately comes from God, and you begin to get grateful for that, for every single thing in your life. In fact, let me put it to you this way. Very simple principle. Every blessing that we don't turn into praise has the potential to turn into pride. I got to say that again because I just think that's tweetable. You're probably going to write that one down. Every blessing that we don't turn into praise has the potential to turn into pride if we don't stop and acknowledge where everything in our lives comes from. And if we don't give thanks for it, we begin to think it's all about us. You know, maybe you're brand new to Christianity and you've just become a follower of Christ recently. And you may know some Christians and they do this thing where they pray before every meal. And you may wonder why they do it or why we do that and why I do that. It's a simple habit that says, even this food that I'm about to eat, that I've worked hard for, that I paid for, that I went to the grocery store and bought, and I put in the microwave and warmed up, even this food ultimately isn't because of my efforts, it's because of God and His grace in my life. And I'm going to acknowledge that, and I'm going to be grateful for that. It's a great story I came across in a book on leadership by John Maxwell, and it's about this idea of acknowledging where everything comes from. And the story goes like this. The son of an immigrant shopkeeper came to his father complaining. He said, "Dad, I don't understand how you run this store. You keep your accounts payable in a cigar box, your accounts receivable are on a spindle, all your cash is in the register. You never know what your profits are." And the father said, "Son, let me tell you something. When I arrived in this land and got off the boat, all I owned was the pants I was wearing. Today, your sister is an art teacher, your brother is a doctor, and you're an accountant. I have 2 cars, a home, and a good business. Everything is paid for." He said, "Add that up and subtract the pants, and there's your profit." Let me tell you something, my friends. You add up everything in your life, subtract nothing. That's the profit. That's what God has given to you, everything that you have. And when you acknowledge that, and when you are intentionally grateful for that, that will do battle with the pride that tends to seep into our hearts as rich people. We need gratitude. Second thing we need is generosity. Here's how this passage ends. He says, Timothy, command them, these rich people, to do good and to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. And you'll notice that those who are rich are never told in the Bible to take a vow of poverty, but we are, as rich people, told to take a vow of generosity, to live beneath our means and to bless others because we have been so blessed. And see, God doesn't need our money, but God knows something. He knows that when we become generous and willing to share, that does something in our hearts. And here's what it does. It makes you let go of the one thing that can easily become the ultimate source of your hope. It causes you, when you're generous, to essentially throw down an idol in your life. When you're generous, it's a way of saying, God, I want to hang on to this for more security, but I'm going to bless this person, and I'm going to help this person, and I'm going to bless this ministry, because ultimately I know that my trust is in you and not in the stuff that I think and the rest of the world thinks is going to give me security. In fact, as you know, we have this phrase on our currency. On all of our currency as Americans, it's this phrase that says, "In God we trust." And every once in a while, somebody will try to, bring a legal case to get that removed from our currency. And whenever that happens, there's always a big outcry among Christians and people of faith. And I always scratch my head at that, because I wonder if that's really so important for us to keep that on our money. Why don't we act like that's true? Because the real measure of whether you trust in God is not what's written on your money. It's what you do with your money. And I think generosity is the most powerful way that we demonstrate we trust God. See, here's the thing. It's not wrong to be rich. In fact, you already are. That's the good news. Give yourself a high five. Give your spouse a high five. You already are rich. But here's the thing. It's not wrong to be rich, but it's dangerous. And you got to watch out for pride. And you got to watch out for your hope beginning to migrate. And if you want to deal with that in the right way, you just become a grateful person. You become a generous person. And then you can be rich in a really, really rich way. So let's wrap up, shall we? Over the course of this series of messages, we're giving you kind of a collective confession here for Parker Hill Church. And we began last week with this little phrase, God has blessed me with more than I need. God has blessed me with more than I need. We talked about that last week in response to that myth, I just need a little bit more. But let's add to this now, okay, based on what we talked about today. God has blessed me with more than I need. I am rich. I will not trust in my riches, but in him who richly provides. I want you to say that with me together on every campus. Here we go. God has blessed me with more than I need. I am rich. I will not trust in my riches, but in him who richly provides. Now, I have a sense that maybe some of you on some of the campuses weren't real enthusiastic about that, so I think we just got to say this one more time, and I want you to say it with gusto, because I want you to purge from your mind and your heart the myths that we sometimes hear from our culture. Okay, so let's say this together. Here we go. God has blessed me with more than I need. I am rich. I will not trust in my riches, but in him who richly provides. Well, I'm going to pray in just a minute, and then we're going to wrap up with one more song. The band is going to come, and the song that we're going to sing at the end is called Trust It All. And you're going to hear these words and sing these words. The song says, my life is in your hands. I trust it all. I trust it all to you. My dreams and all my plans, I trust it all. I trust it all to you. And ultimately, that's what God wants, doesn't he? He wants our hearts, our plans, our dreams. He wants us to trust ourselves completely to him, and we need to do that. So let me pray with you. God, it's been good to be together again here today and just to remind ourselves of truth in a world that's so full of lies. And God, I pray that you would forgive us for those times when we get consumed with all the things of this world that fight for our passion. May our focus be on you. And whether we have much or little, make us grateful people and make us generous people. And I do thank you for the abundance that we enjoy in the most prosperous nation in the world at the most prosperous time in history. Help us never to lose sight of how fortunate we are. Not that our lives will always be easy, not that there aren't stresses and strains in this part of our lives, but ultimately, you have blessed us incredibly. We thank you for that, and may we trust you completely with everything that you've given to us. And I pray that in Christ's name. Amen.